One morning, the Fat Controller and his grandchildren came to see Toby.
Come on, Toby, we're all going to seaside. We will ride in Henrietta.
Yes, sir, said Toby happily. They came to a small seaside station. Soon, the children were playing in the sand, building a splendid castle. The Fat Controller inspected it.
My word, that's a very fine castle. Have you seen a real one like it?
Yes, replied the children. It's here on the island. And they showed him a map. Pondered the Fat Controller. They met Toby at the harbour.
Come on, we're going exploring. It will be a great adventure.
Soon they were in the wildest part of the island. They stopped by a lonely signal box. Where might you be going then? Asked the signalman.
We're trying to find an old castle,
replied the Fat Controller. I know the place, sir, said the signalman. There's a small junction not too far down the line. Just switch the points. When the firemen switched the points, their adventure really began. Toby pushed past branches and bushes till they came to another little junction. There they saw two old signs. One read to the castle and the other to the mine.
We'll go to castle first.
Toby stopped by an old water tower. There's the castle.
Yes, replied the Fat Controller, and now we shall visit the mine.
Once upon a time, the mine had been worked by the little engines and their lines were still in place. But now everything was very rusty and overgrown. The Fat Controller was most impressed, but Toby was rather scared. He was glad when it was time to go home.
I think the castle and the mine will make a very fine place for visitors, but it will take a lot of hard work first.
Yes, sir, said Toby nervously. The Fat Controller's plans were soon put into action, but Toby was still worried. I'm sure this place is haunted, he said to himself. It's our turn to stay here on guard tonight, Toby. Oh, yes, why not? Stuttered Toby. Beware of the ghost, Toby, Thomas said. What ghost? Asked Toby. The old warrior ghost. Every night he lights his fire, then goes hunting. Toot toot, goodbye, Thomas replied. Night came. Toby looked anxiously around. Everything seemed rather spooky. Quite suddenly, he heard a strange wheezing sound. It's the ghost, he wailed. What ghost? His driver asked. It's the old warrior. He's come to hunt me down. Don't be so daft. We'll go and investigate. They returned quite soon. The old warrior wants to meet you, laughed his fireman. Can't he wait till morning? Replied Toby. Ghosts don't work day shifts, said his driver. Toby bravely made his way. Well, bless my bell, he exclaimed. There in front of him was a little old engine. This is your ghost, Toby, said the signalman. His name's really Bertram, but we call him the old warrior because he's so brave. Bertram and Toby are now firm friends. They take the visitors to the splendid castle and the mine. If there are any ghosts here, they certainly help to make the place very happy. Oliver and his brake van, Toad, liked working in the big yards, but one morning Toad noticed that Oliver was unhappy. He decided to find out why. Excuse me, Mr. Oliver, it seems to me that things are not well with you, if you forgive me for mentioning it. You're quite right, Toad, replied Oliver. All I do is shunt these trucks onto the turntable. I long for a nice run. It's what an engine really needs. quite so, Mr. Oliver. May I suggest that you speak to the Fat Controller about your problems? Oliver just grew unhappier, and he was rough with the trucks. "You're no good, Oliver. You're dangerous. We want Percy." "Pa, Percy's far too busy to be bothered with the likes of you." And he bumped the trucks hard. "You silly engine!" shouted a workman. "It'll take a long time to repair this turntable, which'll cause confusion and delay." That night, the Fat Controller came to see Oliver in his shed.
Oliver, you have caused confusion. I thought you could control trucks. You shall work the mail train for a while. Maybe the night air will clear your smoke box."
"Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," said Oliver sadly. "Cheer up, old chap," said his driver. "The mail train run is a grand run for a fine engine like you." Oliver smiled, but he still felt he'd let everyone down. His driver took them along the coastal run with the mail train. The sea was calm and the fresh air couldn't help but brighten Oliver's spirits. They made good speed until it was time to collect some important mail from Harold the helicopter. "Come on, Harold." They waited and waited. At last, Harold landed.
"Sorry I'm late, Great Western. Had a bit of a problem with one of my arms. Kept letting me down when I was meant to be up. You know how it is,"
said Harold. "We know that we'll be late for our first run," replied Oliver's driver. Soon they were on their way again. Ahead was a red signal light. Oliver didn't realize that the signalman had dozed off waiting for them. Oliver whistled several times, but the signal stayed red. "There must be something wrong with that signal. We'll go slowly and stop by the signal box," said his driver. But they never reached it. The points before the signal box were switched to an old track. They were going the wrong way. Oliver's fireman was concerned. "We need to find a water tower soon." Instead, they saw an old rundown station. Disaster lay ahead. Meanwhile, the Fat Controller was very worried.
"Oliver has not returned. We had better send out a search party."
Soon he was high in the sky with Harold.
There they are.
"It wasn't Oliver's fault," sighed the driver.
"I'm aware of that. I'm just glad you are all safe."
Then he saw something. It was an empty old house beside the station. He went to inspect it. When he returned, he spoke to Oliver.
"Oliver, you have found another attraction for our island. We'll make this house as good as new and visitors can come and have tea and crumpets there."
Sighed Oliver happily. Getting lost can be interesting, but being found is much nicer, especially when it makes an engine feel really useful. It was an icy day on the island of Sodor. The engines were working very hard. They didn't mind the cold because they had toasting hot fireboxes to keep them warm. That evening, the Fat Controller came to the shed.
"There's a big freeze coming tonight," he said. "James and Percy are to deliver extra coal to the stations."
"Yes, sir," they said eagerly, and the Fat Controller drove away. "You'd better hurry," teased Thomas, "or Scary Jack Frost might get you." "Who's Jack Frost?" Percy whistled nervously.
Don't be silly, sniffed James. Jack Frost is not scary.
Yes, he is, teased Thomas. He's all white with a big spiky face.
Rubbish, said James.
James knew Jack Frost wasn't scary, but poor Percy wasn't so sure.
Percy shivered. Jack Frost is not scary. Jack Frost is not scary. Jack Frost is not scary.
Meanwhile, James puffed along his route.
Silly Percy, he thought. All steamed up over Jack Frost.
Percy made his last delivery. The station master was very pleased to see him.
"Oh, Percy," he cried, "we need twice as much coal to last through this freeze." "Don't worry," Percy said. "This is my last stop. You can have mine."
So Percy's driver parked him in a siding with only a lantern for company.
"Do you think Scary Jack Frost will find me?" said Percy.
"Jack Frost's not scary," chuckled his driver. "And don't worry, Elizabeth will bring you some more coal in the morning." And then his driver and fireman went home to bed. Late at night, the icy wind howled. It started to snow. Soon, Percy's face was so cold an icicle hung from his nose. "Oh, bother," Percy stuttered, but it didn't sound like Percy. It was so cold he could hardly make a sound. At last, James was on his way back to the sheds. In the fog, he saw shadows and strange and scary shapes.
"Scary Jack Frost," he whispered nervously. "Pah!"
"Hello, James," muttered Percy icily.
"Scary Jack Frost!" cried James, and he raced away as fast as his wheels could carry him.
He didn't stop until he got back to the sheds. The next morning, Elizabeth brought plenty of coal.
"Oh, my dear," Elizabeth chuffed to Percy. "It looks like Jack Frost really got you then."
The firelighter started Percy's fire. Soon his ice mask melted away.
"So Scary Jack Frost is only frost," tooted Percy happily.
And soon he was as warm as toast. When Percy arrived at the sheds, James was bragging to the other engines.
"I saw Scary Jack Frost last night," James huffed. "He even knows my name."
"He also knows that you ran away," teased Percy.
And all the engines whistled, including James.
But Percy's was the loudest whistle of all.
If someday you should see Thomas the Tank Engine puffing happily along the line, he may be on his way to a village nestled deep in the heart of the island of Sodor. One December morning, Thomas whistled to all his friends. "It's nearly Christmas, and I'll bring you lots of letters and parcels." But a week later, the storms came. The island was covered with thick snow. The engines found work difficult. Some had to help clear snow from the track, and workmen hacked away at the frozen banks of ice. Thomas and Percy were collecting important post for Christmas. "Driver said there's lots of post for the village," said Thomas. "I'll need an extra truck for it all." Percy was feeling left out. "It's not fair. You're not leaving any post for me." But Percy's chance had come. "There's been a change of plan," said Thomas's driver. "The Fat Controller needs us at the big station." Percy, you are to take Thomas's train to the village. Percy was delighted, but Thomas was sad. I won't be able to say Happy Christmas to all my friends. Don't worry, said Percy kindly. I'll do it for you. It's not the same, sighed Thomas. Percy was making good time on his way to the village when suddenly... "What's that?" called his driver. There ahead was a fogman by the line. He was holding a red light. "The village is cut off by snow," he shouted. "We need snowplows, workmen and a helicopter. Leave your trucks in the sidings and go back quickly." Percy was soon steaming to Harold's airfield. "Beep, beep," whistled Percy. "Wake up, lazy wings. The mountain villagers need your help. They're stranded." "Whiz-ow," replied Harold. "I like an emergency to keep me warm." And he buzzed away. "Now," sighed Percy, "what's next?" Suddenly, there was Thomas with Terence the tractor and a works train. "Come on, Percy," whistled Thomas. "Follow me." The two engines battled their way through the snow. At last, they reached the village. Harold was already there, busily dropping food to people and animals. Terence quickly got to work. "Lovely stuff," he said as he pushed the snow aside. "Well done, Percy. Well done, Thomas," cheered the villagers. "You're the best Santa Claus this village has ever had." "What's a Santa Claus?" asked Percy. "Santa Claus is someone who drops presents down chimneys at Christmas time." Percy looked at his funnel. "I wonder if..." "No," laughed Thomas. "Chimneys, Percy, not funnels. Which reminds me, your post train is still back in the siding, isn't it?" Percy hurried back to fetch it. Just then, Toby arrived with Henrietta. "We've brought lots of hot drinks and food for the villagers," he whistled. That night, all the engines had gone back to their sheds except Toby. The villagers had made a plan to thank the engines. They loaded paint pots and parcels into Henrietta, then they set off through the moonlit countryside. All the engines were fast asleep in the sheds as Toby ran silently into the yards. He had no idea what the villagers were going to do, but he knew it was going to be a big surprise. When the engines woke the next morning, they could not believe their eyes. The sheds had been repainted and decorated. Parcels lay everywhere. The engines whistled in delight, and everyone agreed that it was really a happy Christmas.